listening to The Tenderness Revolution, a podcast about the stories of kindness, compassion, and empathy that play out in our lives, because these deeply moving experiences describe what it means to be human and invite us into a new way of thinking about the world and each other. I'm your host, writer and journalist Yvonne Gavin. And every episode, I'll be asking a new interviewee about a pivotal moment of tenderness that helped shape the course of their life. I'm here today with author and parenting expert, Dr. Laura Markham, a trained clinical psychologist who earned her PhD at Columbia University. Dr. Markham has worked extensively as a parenting coach, as well as a writer, speaker, and advocate for a parenting style that emphasises connection and empathy over discipline. She's also the founder of the hugely popular parenting website, ahaparenting.com, that provides insights and advice to parents of children from babyhood to the teen years, and is based on the idea of an aha moment that she describes as a lightning flash of insight, when suddenly we see things from another perspective and everything has the potential to be different. Her books include Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids, How to Stop Yelling and Start Connecting, and Peaceful Parent, Happy Siblings, How to Stop the Fighting and Raise Friends for Life. She has 2 grown-up children and currently lives in New York with her husband. Dr. Laura, I'm so excited to speak to you today, and thank you for being on the podcast. It's really great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to meet you.
So I'm really familiar with your work. I've been a fan for a long time. And when I discovered your website, ahaparenting.com, it was like a revelation, because I was really hoping that something like that was out there, because I had found the kind of ideas that I had about parenting, I didn't feel that they were the mainstream. And I always felt a bit like I was being judged for my approach to bringing up my kids. And then when I found your website, I was like, oh, this is like what I wanted to hear, and it was so reassuring. It was like someone was giving me a hug and saying, it's okay, it is difficult, and just keep saying, to your kids, I'm sorry, that it didn't work out very well today. And it was brilliant. I really have found your work to be very helpful over the years, your books and your website.
I'm so glad I do this.
Brilliant. It's I'm really excited to talk to you. So this podcast is about tenderness, and at the beginning I like to ask the guest to share a moment of tenderness with us, because the idea is that essentially our lives are made up of all of these little stories that are stitched together. And I believe that when we shine a light on scenes where we felt a profound sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, moments when we felt seen or understood, or that we had a deeper relationship to the world around us, it's as though we're awakened to greater sort of meaning and purpose. And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. So is there a moment from your life that you could share with us?
Well, there are probably many. I guess since we're talking about parenting, I'll share one that happened with my daughter, and that I think every parent listening will recognize.
Fantastic.
I had guests coming for dinner, and I discovered I was out of garlic. And I sent my 11-year-old up to the corner to get some garlic. Now, I live in New York City, but she walked past that grocery store on her way to middle school every day. And it was still light out, and it was only, 3/4 of a block away. But as I'm chopping vegetables, she sort of didn't come back, and she didn't come back. And you know how you start to go a little bit into a state of alarm, even though it's below consciousness. You don't actually know there's a threat, but some part of you is worried, and you start to get more tense and anxious, and you don't quite know. You're not really, I was focused on the clock and the vegetables and where's the garlic, and, not so much the fact that I was getting more tense and anxious by the moment as she wasn't walking in the door. But she did walk in the door. She burst in, dropped her jacket on the floor, and yelled, "Mom, can we have a kitten?" And I was like, already tense and anxious, and no, we can't have a kitten. Your dad's allergic to cats. You know that. Where's the garlic? And she said, "Oh, but Mom, they're giving away kittens in front of the grocery store." And she proceeds to describe every kitten in the box, the black one with the white feet and the calico. But she's doing it in this voice that's very revved up, but also very whiny. You know how they can get under your skin when they whine? Well, like when they're 3, they do that pretty often. They can still do it at 11. And here she is, "But Mom," and I'm already somewhat tense and anxious and behind on my recipe and watching the clock and not really fully present in the moment, not really listening to her. And I'm saying, "No cat. We have a dog. Where's the garlic?" And she's saying, "Oh, and then there was the gray one," And finally, I'm crossing the room to get something, and I tripped on her jacket. And I snapped, "Alice, stop going on about those cats. Pick up your jacket and give me the garlic." And she glared at me, put her hands on her hips, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Get your own garlic. I'm not your servant."
That's amazing.
At which point, I realized I was doing everything wrong. And, I had a choice to make. She was dysregulated. I was dysregulated. I was ready to slide down that slippery slope onto the low road of parenting and start yelling and send go to your room until you can be civil. Don't you speak to me that way. And, when I was her age, if I had said something like that to my stepdad, I would have been slapped across the face.
Yeah.
So, so certainly as she screamed at me, I was like, starting to.
Yeah. You can
escalate.
feel it in your body, can't you?
Yes. You just, and as I did that, I looked at her and I just thought, we don't need to do this way. And I did what I call stop, drop, and breathe. Stop what you're doing. I literally turned off the stove and walked over to her. Drop your agenda. My agenda was just to get the garlic and get ready before the guests walked in the door. I dropped my agenda just for that moment and breathe. Stop, drop, and breathe. And I just breathed a few deep breaths, and I just looked at her, and she looked sort of stricken standing there. Clearly she was embarrassed and ashamed and felt like she crossed the line, but she was also just mad. And I just took another deep breath, and I just purposely let it go, choose love here, choose love, just switch gears. I think these moments that you're talking about, they're moments of grace, but we have to be willing. We have to be willing.
It's true.
Right? We have to open ourselves to it. And so I just took a deep breath and I said, "Oh, sweetie, we don't talk to each other that way in this house." And she said, "But you were talking to me that way." So I had to take another deep breath.
Yeah.
Say, "You're right. You're right. You're right. I was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry." No one deserves to be yelled at. You didn't deserve to be yelled at. So that's pretty good, right? So far, so good, right? I calmed down, I connected, I apologized, except watch this. But I said, "But," that you ruin everything when you say "but." I said, "But you weren't listening to me," I said. And she said, "You weren't listening to me either," which was true, right?
It's true.
I was like, "Oh my goodness, you're right." And I said, "You're right, sweetheart. I wasn't listening to you. I was in a hurry. I was feeling pressured. I was worried when you were gone. And then I was all anxious when you walked in the door. And when you walked in the door, you weren't listening to me. You were anxious too. And you were just going on and you weren't listening to me. And did something happen on your walk?" And she said, "Of course something happened on my walk. They're going to kill those kittens." And she burst into tears
Oh.
and hurled herself into my arms and just sobbed.
Oh.
So all the anger just melted away, hers and mine, because she felt safe enough to, once I had stopped escalating, she felt safe enough to show me all this. And she just sobbed. And I didn't say, "No, they won't." I just said, "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry." And I kept breathing, and I kept trying to not look at the clock or at the snot on my shoulder. And finally, she's blowing her nose and she says, "Mom, I'm sorry I was rude. It's just you and Dad raised me to be a good person, and I just wish there was something I could do to help those kittens so they don't kill them." And I had just read this article about that morning about what happens when children feel powerless.
Mm.
When they encounter unfairness in the world,
Mm.
what you might even think of as evil,
Mm.
kittens being put to death, a hurricane, a war,
Mm.
racism. There's so many things that children begin to learn about that are so devastating to their sense of justice in the world and their belief in the world as a safe and good place. When they make these discoveries, if we basically give them a message that there's nothing they can do and nothing we can do, they become cynical. They become
Mm.
embittered. And by the time they're teenagers, they're angry
Mm.
and they lose faith in
Mm.
humanity,
Mm.
in the possibilities of change
Mm.
in us.
It's fascinating.
If we can give them some hope, they hang on to that and it shapes them and
Mm.
they become empowered to stand up for what they want and believe needs to happen to make the world a better place. So I'm looking at her and thinking, wow, what could I say? And I just said, "I wonder," which is a great way to begin when you don't know what to say. I wonder if maybe there is something you could do to help the kittens. I mean, short of adopting one. And she said, "Oh, like like if she didn't adopt one, what else was there, right?" And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I could donate my allowance and I could stand on the corner to help talk to the people to give them away. And those towels you were going to make into rags, I could bring those up for the bottom of the cages." And so she's all of a sudden
Mm.
brainstorming. She's
She's
had a
thinking for
chance.
herself. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, she's thinking for herself. She's solving her own problem because she's had a chance to actually be heard, have her feelings empathized with, have a space for her to work through those feelings. And I didn't do anything. All I did was be there, be present. And she's brainstorming. And then all of a sudden she gets her eyes get really big and she looks at me and she says, "Oh, Mom, I I didn't even make it into the store because of the cats. I completely forgot your garlic. I'm
Oh.
so sorry. I'll be right back." And she dashes out of the house. So that's my moment.
Oh, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And it's made me think of so many things. It's very familiar for
Yes.
me as a parent of three children. And I think one of the things that really comes up for me is this capacity of empathy and this saying sorry to your children. And I think that was a real aha moment for me. And for some reason, I used to find that so difficult with my kids. I used to find it so hard to say sorry. And I remember kind of realizing that maybe I just need to apologize for this thing, that and take responsibility, that I should have done something differently, and they've pointed it out. And as soon as I did it, the whole energy changed, between us. And it's almost as though I've seen it with all of them just soften, like in that moment where that you're about to have a conflict, and then it's like you make that decision like you did. I think I just need to say sorry, or I'm sorry that you're finding this so hard. And when I started sort of parenting like that, everything changed. Everything changed. But it took it it took me quite a few years actually to get there. And
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated with why it's so difficult to be a calm parent. It really fascinates me. And I think I've always believed that it's the ultimate approach, with kids. And I see that it's the best thing, and I see that it works, but it's tremendously difficult. And I think this is what people say. It's hard. And I think it's all about that thing of presence, and just how hard it is to be present and to be calm in life as we know it, because the life that most of us lead is not calm, and it's not conducive to presence. So I think that what we need to do is try and cultivate that in ourselves as individuals before we can go into the parent child relationship. And I think that's the bit that maybe people need to hear, that they need to kind of start to try and approach themselves in a different way.
I think that it's really hard once we're in a state of, I said state of emergency before.
Mm,
You know, we experience the world, human minds perceive the world as threatening all the time. Our 3-year-old, it's a threat when she
mm,
says, I want a new mommy. That's not a threat. That's her trying to get her way and
mm,
telling you how mad she is and how frustrated. It is not actually a threat.
mm,
It's a threat when someone else takes the parking space we wanted. It's a threat when we're running behind because we misplanned our day and the kids are getting cranky in the back of the car. It's so easy for the human mind to perceive a threat. And when you're threatened, what happens? Well, your body goes into a state of emergency.
mm,
It says, okay, fight, flight, or freeze. Maybe there's a tiger here. And it doesn't know it's the 3-year-old. It's pumping out the adrenaline and the cortisol and all the stress hormones and neurotransmitters. So I think it's hard to be a calm parent because you're in this intimate relationship with someone who does not have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, who has their own opinions about life and what they want, and really does not understand why it's important for you to get to your meeting, and they, they're they don't like to be pushed around,
mm,
right? It's no human wants to be pushed around. They want a sense of agency. And yet it's our job to move them through the schedule of the day.
mm,
Okay, now it's time for lunch. Now it's time for dinner. Clean up the toys, brush your teeth, get on your shoes. There's a constant, never ending stream of control issuing from us, the parents, to the child. And the child is like, if they feel very connected to us, they forgive us and they're willing to try to go along with us because they love us and depend on us and all that. But it's not what they want. And the strong-willed ones especially get their hackles up when we're pushing them around. I think it's very hard, given that situation, for there not to be conflict. Every human relationship has conflict, right? And when you're in that setup with a child, naturally there will be some conflict. And then we experience that as a threat. So I think for all of us parents, if we can just notice, if we can be
mm,
present enough to
mm,
notice, like I did with my daughter, okay, on the slippery
mm,
slope here, okay, it's not really a threat that the kid won't put his shoes on or brush his teeth or eat his dinner or whatever else we feel like we're getting all agitated about. We can stop, drop our agenda, take a
mm.
breath, have a do-over. We don't have to get dysregulated here. And, when we do that, it's amazing how much more calm our children are.
Yeah, I see that as well with my kids. When I manage to be calm, and I have that energy, and I bring that to an interaction, they copy that, they mirror
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And the same with, if I'm anxious and stressed, that gets mirrored as well. And it's hard when you see that coming back at you and you're like, oh, that's me. um, but
When you think about it, that's biologically determined,
yeah,
evolutionarily determined,
mirroring,
right?
yeah.
They have to be able to look at us to know, if they see something that might be a threat. Here's a puppy. They don't know if that puppy's a threat or not. And they look at us and we're smiling, say, oh, it's a puppy. They're going to be nice with the puppy. If it's a tiger, we're going to go, no, it's a tiger. And they're going to run,
Yeah.
So they're reading us all
Yeah.
the time and taking their cues from us. If we're acting like it's an emergency because
Mm.
we're having a hard day,
Mm.
they're going to feel like it's an emergency too. And then they're in fight, flight, or freeze, which means everybody's dysregulated at the same time.
Mm. And that's not a good situation to be in. I've been in that situation and I don't want to be in it again.
Yes.
There's so much there that I want to sort of unpick. I wanted to sort of start off by talking about sort of the main themes in your work. One of the things I've read you talk about and I've seen you writing about before is intimacy. I think that's very interesting in the parent-child relationship. It might sound obvious, but can you just explain to our listeners why intimacy is so important and what do you mean when you talk about intimacy?
Well, intimacy is hard to define, but we know it when we feel it, right? It's that you feel it in your heart, you feel it in your eyes soften, you just open emotionally, right? And it's that close connection with another human being that opens you to something larger, right? To some people think of it as the divine, but whatever it is, it's bigger than both of us, and it happens. We can tap into it in nature. We can tap into it. Some of us in church, we can tap into it in different ways. But when we're singing with a choir, there's all kinds of research on that we tap into something greater. But we also do it one-on-one with another human being. When we really let down our guard and we're just fully present with them. That's intimacy. And it is a baby's natural state. When they're born, they come here ready to connect. They're not guarded yet. They're looking for intimacy. I remember when my firstborn was very young, maybe, a year old, old enough to have a relationship, but not to be very verbal, very young toddler. I remember him looking in my eyes with the most loving, open gaze that it was hard for me to stay present and meet it. And I was, I had to, the first time it happened, I looked away and I was embarrassed and I felt like I'd failed him. And I thought, why did I look away? And I realized that I had never had anyone look at me that way. I don't know that my parents were able to. They were products of their time.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right? And even my husband, who I had a good relationship and I think now have a great relationship with, I don't know that even though we had been married for a couple of years by then, I don't know that I had ever shared a deep moment that deep with him. I think it was something I had never experienced before. And I think if we're open, our children can do this for us.
Oh my gosh, that's so incredibly beautiful. I mean, I think you're talking about deep connection, but I think you're also talking about, it's almost like you saw the true inner being of your son without all the layers that get added on as we move through the world. We put this armor on and it can be very difficult for us to really be our true self, which I believe is there when we're born. I think who we are is there, and that's why I find it's incredibly moving when you have a baby and you look in their eyes and you see that's who they are. And I find that's been one of the most astonishing things for me about becoming a parent, was realizing that that person they are when they're born is who they are forever. Like, it's who they are at their core. And I still see it. My eldest is 15 and I still see in her eyes who she was at that moment when she was born. And that is such a powerful thing. And that I think you have to be able to see that. I mean, I think also, I think it's fascinating, like you said, you didn't ever experience that with your parents. Why do we find all of this so difficult? And what do we need to do almost as a collective, to kind of find this tenderness in ourselves and move into a space where we can experience intimacy more often with each other and actually with ourselves as well.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
I've been doing a lot of work on self-compassion recently, and it changes everything. It
Mhm.
changes how you show up with other people. But I think
Yes.
that's where the work has to begin, because we can't be compassionate towards others until we can have compassion for ourselves. And actually, I think people find that really, really difficult.
You're right. I think the research on how children can change you shows that even when you have had a hard childhood and you have come out of it with a with some challenges to being tender to yourself, your children can, not always, but can evoke that tenderness and that love. And that can be transformative. It's actually, if we can give love to our children, it transforms our ability to love ourselves. But the flip side is also true, that often we can't give that love to our children until
Mm,
we can love ourselves. So I think working on both fronts at once
mm,
is, the way to healing for
mm,
ourselves.
mm,
And you're right. If you can't, so many, I talk to parents all day, every day. And I hear so often, I was talking to a mother, she's pregnant, she already has some children, several children, and she was talking about how resentful she felt toward her children. I know this mom
mm,
adores her children,
mm.
but of course she feels resentful. She's just empty. She's just wrung out, about to have a baby. She's not feeling very good physically. Her children are, challenging, and she's worn out.
Mm,
And I, if she can just take care of her,
mm,
she will have something to give her children, and she'll be able to restore her connection to her children. But it's almost like she has to start with herself
mm,
to be compassionate with herself. She was judging herself for feeling resentment. Like, no, of course you feel resentment. Don't, there's no reason to judge yourself. You love your children. Start with you. Take care of you. When you have a full cup,
mm,
I think of it almost as, this is what I think of it for myself. I discovered this image many years ago in meditation. It's that when I am parked on sort of the eternal spring, I I overflow
mm,
with love and goodness and compassion for everyone. When I'm buffeted by circumstance, which happens daily, right?
yeah.
Um, when I get too busy, when I get distracted, when I'm not present,
Mm,
I'm not on that spring.
mm,
And it's easy to run dry and to run out of what we might actually want to be able to share
mm,
for with others or even for ourselves.
mm,
So I think that work to bring myself back to that spring,
mm.
um, it is the most important
The
thing for
most,
us.
yes, absolutely. And it's those difficult feelings, and then it's the thoughts about those feelings, like, I'm feeling like I'm completely spent and I don't have anything left to give. What kind of parent am I that I feel this?
Mm.
And I actually think so much of that comes from society. And this is something that I really feel strongly about, that I feel there needs to be almost like a change in the story we tell about what it means to be a parent, because I have often felt judged. And whether that was true, whether that was just me creating stories in my mind, or whether, someone really was judging me, it doesn't really matter. But I do feel that the job of being a parent is a good parent is tremendously difficult. And it's not necessarily in the doing, it's the being part that's difficult. And I think that that's almost not common knowledge. I don't think a lot of people really understand that, or people are very quick to judge, or they have ideas about what a parent should do. And if something doesn't work out, what what a parent's done wrong, and the part a parent has played in things not working out. And I think if there was more kindness and empathy towards parents and more understanding of, what goes in to being a parent, because, it uses up so much energy. um, if there was more awareness of that, then maybe parents wouldn't be so hard on themselves. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, I think our society does not support parents. You're right. It judges parents, and if we did support parents, it would make parenting a lot easier. I think we've come from we're as humans are still evolving. We're engaged in a well in some great experiments. We're right now there is an experiment about what is strength. Is strength being tough the way that maybe my parents' generation thought, or is strength about integrity and connection,
Mm,
tenderness, right? Is
mm,
that what strength is actually? Is it holding hands all together, you know, as humans for
mm,
what we believe and what can be transformative, right? As opposed to having to win uh, by being tough. There's a whole
mm.
there's a whole experiment about cooperation versus competition that humans are engaged in right now. And so I love that you talk about tenderness. I think we don't value tenderness as a society. We
No,
don't value children. We
no.
don't value children because they're not tough. They're naive. They're tender. They're tiny. They're not strong yet, whatever. We don't value children. Individually, we value our children, but as a society,
As a
we,
society.
if you look at at least what Western culture, not all, I mean, I think in Norway, maybe they value their children more, but I think, at least in the United States, which I'm most familiar with,
Mm.
I think we don't, if you look where the money goes, it doesn't go to support children,
No,
right? It doesn't go to schools. It doesn't go to what children need. And when you don't value children, you don't value their caregivers. You don't value their parents. And again, we don't value women. Women are valued to the degree they're in male roles in corporations or government. They're not really valued for being teachers or caregivers or raising children. And we don't see it even as an important and challenging, the children we're raising today are the people of tomorrow. They will be who they are is what the planet will be. But we're
absolutely.
not seeing that and valuing that.
No, no, I think you're so right. I mean, just the fact that, maternity leave, paid maternity leave doesn't really exist in the US. And I just think you're absolutely right. I mean, children aren't valued, I suppose, because they're not a commodity. They don't bring anything to the, you know, economic system. In fact, they get in the way.
Right.
So and everything is about that. So I think yeah, I think it's a problem. And yeah, you look at countries like Sweden and you think how amazing it is that they do really value parental leave, and they actually make room for that. They have joint parental leave. But yeah, I think I do feel like something needs to change, and I think something is going to change. I'm trying to be hopeful here. It might be gradual, and it's going to happen, I think, over quite a long period of time. But I think we're going to move in that direction as we have more awareness of all of this, thanks to you and your work.
I
Um,
think there are a lot of us working across the planet to transform the way we relate to children. And
mm,
I absolutely think we can just look at statistics on child abuse, on sexual abuse, on all kinds of things that are actually different
mm,
now. I mean, we listen to children, we believe children more likely, now than we used to. And so I do agree with you. I'm actually quite hopeful
mm.
about the human experiment.
Yeah, no, I am too. Um, I just wanted to go back to some of the themes that we started talking about in your work. One of them, things that I find very interesting is control, and why as parents we often have this instinctive need to want to control our children rather than, I think, coach, which is the term that you use. And again, I'm very interested in why it's so difficult for us to do that, to coach. Why is it more instinctive for us to kind of go in with the controlling sort of approach until we become conscious and we realize sort of what we're doing?
Well, when we experience a threat, immediately we click into, as I said, fight, flight, or freeze, which is a very controlling kind of a, you're revved up. You may not be yet fighting or running or anything else, but you're ready to control the situation. And, it's the opposite of tenderness. It's the opposite of empathy. We stop seeing the other person as someone we love, and we start seeing them as someone to be controlled. I would even say there's a parallel that people listening might recognize. If your friend comes to you and your friend says, I've been thinking, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do what I believe in. And I'm going to, I'm going to do what I was born to do. And they describe this big change. And you say, wow, go you, what a courageous thing. Well done, you, to come up to the, you really encourage your friend. If your partner, your husband or wife, comes to you and says the exact same thing, you know what you say? You must be crazy. We need your income. What are you talking about? Right? You aren't interested in what's going to make your partner's heart sing at that moment. You're just feeling the threat of, oh no, if they make a change, it affects me in a big way. Uh-oh, no, you can't do that. That's a threat to me. So we try to control them, right? And when you think about it, children affect us all the time, every day in big ways, right? Are we going to have a pleasant evening, or is it going to be full of meltdowns? Are they going to cooperate with us on this? Are they going to reflect well on us? We're at the grocery store. They're being difficult at the grocery store. Everyone's staring at us. Or worse yet, we're at our mother-in-law's. Same thing. She's staring at us. So, we're constantly in a position where we feel that there's a problem here with our child. And if we can just control them, it will not get out of hand. But of course, the minute we apply that control, it does get out of hand. They get more dysregulated. They begin to escalate. They don't want to be controlled, right? No human does well with control.
So that's fear, isn't it? Right. So you're talking about this fear that's underlying and that's driving that desire. And I find it's just so often underneath, fear is so often underneath all these kind of darker types of behavior that we display as humans. And that, I just think you described that so well, and it will be familiar to so many people, that kind of desperation that takes over you, and you just want them to not have a meltdown in public. You want to be able to control them, and I've never really been able to control my children very well. They have big emotions, but actually one thing that does interest me is that some families do seem to manage this, and this is something that I used to torture myself looking at other families and other children, that terrible thing of comparison that always is like a dark road to go down. And I used to look at other families with children who seemed to be extremely compliant, and I used to look at how other people responded to those children, and I used to feel a sort of sense of shame, and why haven't I managed to achieve that? And why does everybody think that those children are so much more worthy and valuable than my children who aren't really like that? And I think this is another thing of how we perceive parents and parenthood in society. And if we carry on sort of really admiring children who only behave a certain way, it puts a lot of pressure on other parents whose children maybe aren't quite like that.
It is true that we value as a society, we it starts when they're born. How many people ask you, oh, is he a good baby?
Good.
I'm like, aren't they all good? Oh, I
Yeah,
mean, does he sleep? Well, it's like he's gonna sleep or not sleep, but that doesn't make him a good or a bad baby.
I know.
Like, wow.
Those
Are they
words.
good, right? Are they cooperative? Do they do what we want them to do?
Are they
Not
cool?
are they blossoming and, learning new skills and becoming responsible people? No, are they
Yeah.
good? Are they compliant?
Are they compliant? Yeah. Do they do what they're told?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Are they compliant? It seems to be so much weight on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Another theme that I'm really interested in is listening, and why listening is so important and so key, but a particular type of listening, like a deep sort of listening to your child, and actually really being able to listen and get a sense of who they are. Because I think one of our challenges as a parent is to fully see our children as who they are, rather than versions of us, which is what we might want them to be. But
Mm.
actually sometimes it's difficult to see your child, and like I always wanted my kids to be into music and play instruments because that's what I loved, but they don't, like, they just don't want to do that. And sometimes it's really hard to accept, but you have to try and sometimes fully see who are they, and what are they telling me, and what do they want. And again, why is that so difficult?
You know, I think it's natural that we want our children to have everything good we ever had and everything good we didn't get, right? And we try to give that to them, and we try to have them be that person, right? Um, my husband messed around a lot in college, and he was so, our children, he would say to them all the time, every time they had to pick classes, take an extra class, don't mess around, and, like, okay, if you want to have a college career, dad, go back and go to college again. But I'm going to decide what I want to do with my classes, right? I'm not going to be you. I just think that we have so much of our own stuff that's unfinished business in a way
Yeah, like
that
stories.
we,
Yeah.
yes, yes, stories that we want them to make up for all the things that
Yeah.
we didn't get or didn't do. And also all the things, you say that you did music and your music was really important to you. And maybe, if your children did that, it would get even bigger. Your dream, would be realized,
Mm.
right? I think there's also that's very normal, but there's another darker side to that, which is that all of us have some pain from growing up, some pain of some kind. And if we don't work on that pain inside us, we perpetuate it on someone else. That's what happens to pain. The definition of violence, actually, the origin of violence in this world is, if you have pain, if the definition of violence, I would say, is when someone has pain that they did not take responsibility for. And then it just gets perpetuated into the world on
Mm.
other people, right?
Mm.
It's the origin of all violence. So, that's violence between countries, it's violence within communities, it's violence within families. And it's even the emotional overriding of another person. I wouldn't call that violence, but I would say when my husband tried to get my son to do certain things, and, that wasn't where my son's integrity was taking him. So
Mm.
I love that you're talking about it as listening. Like,
Mm.
my husband was too caught up in his own need that he hadn't finished some work inside himself, that he couldn't really hear what my son was saying about what he wanted to do,
Mm.
right? So I
Mm.
think in order to listen, we have to do our own work on ourselves so we can just show up and be present and really hear what they're saying.
Oh, that's so true. I think that's fascinating. And what you were saying about pain and how it morphs, and that's what, that's kind of the origin of violence. Is that what you think is kind of underlying, sort of, the shootings that you see, occurring, when you see teenagers, you know the atrocities that they have committed, and it can be so difficult to understand what is going on, and why those things are occurring. Do you think it's just like a sort of a buildup of pain of through the generations being passed
I
on?
I think that there is some way in which we pass on pain through the generations. There's no question about that. And I've seen it over and over again, that when a parent works through something and feels like that's done and they've let it go and they're past that, something lightens in them and something lightens in their child. It's interesting how that works. And we don't fully understand the intergenerational transmission of trauma and pain, but we know part of it happens in your genes, part of it happens in the cradle, and part of it happens just in the things we say in our worldview that gets transmitted. But the shootings you mentioned, yes, of course, there's a tremendous amount of pain. And, the United States, which is famous for its shootings, it's the wealthiest country in the history of the world, but it is spiritually impoverished. It's spiritually impoverished. And so we do not actually meet people's needs for intimacy and connection. We don't meet their needs for emotional wholeness, for being able to heal. We don't meet their needs for contribution. Every human wants meaning that comes from contribution. People are not actually born lazy and greedy. They become lazy, quote, lazy and greedy. I wouldn't even use those words. They become someone who's not contributing to the greater good out of a sense that if they don't, no one will take care of them. They have to take care of number one. And, people, as you said, are born tender. And no one who is tender goes in and shoots up a classroom, right? And so those walls that get built around the heart that allow someone to pick up a gun and shoot someone, those walls, they come from somewhere, right? They come from what we do to people after they're born, as a society, as a family. What are we doing to our babies that allow them to grow into shooters? I will add, there's pain all over the world, not just in the United States, but in the United States, there are a great number of guns. And if there weren't, you would not have this level of violence because, in the UK, where the populace doesn't have guns, there are children in pain. There are teenagers in pain, but they're not shooting up their schools, right? So I think if we simply took action there, it would change a lot of things because, that pain, that one teenager's pain is terrible. And we owe that teenager healing. But when that teenager walks into a classroom and shoots up their classmates, suddenly that pain just got magnified by factors of 1,000 with all the families they just destroyed, right? So we don't have to let that happen if we don't have guns so readily available.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I think pain, is a really interesting one, and how we manage pain in ourselves and in each other. And I've heard you speak before about how we always have this tendency to want to give advice instantly, to sort of jump in when we hear of another person's pain. That's often our first response. Like we just want the pain to go away. And how what we really need to learn is to listen and to be present with the pain. So to allow it to show up, to allow each other to feel it, because I think feelings are kind of almost seen as an inconvenience, actually, things that get in the way. And also pain, I think, is very scary to us.
And I think the more pain we're carrying, the harder it is to be there with someone else's pain. I'm thinking of a preschool teacher who described to me, she had a child who was dropped off by his parents. He was new in this preschool and he was sobbing. And one of the other children was staring at him and walked over. All the children were very concerned about him sobbing. And one of the other children, and the teacher was trying to comfort the child, but one of the other children walks up. He's just a little guy. He walks up and he's got these big eyes and he's looking at the other child and he hits him. And the teacher's like, "What did you hit him for?" And then another child, she came up and she gave this child who was crying her blankie, right, to comfort him. And the preschool teacher said to me, why the difference in these two children? Is it a boy versus a girl? And I said, I don't think it's about gender. I think It's that that little boy, when he saw that degree of pain, it reminded him of when he'd felt like this, when he had felt that he was crying and his parents weren't there for him and had dropped him off or whatever, when somebody wasn't there for him and he was in pain. And he couldn't bear seeing this reflection of what he had felt. He
Oh.
couldn't bear it. You know how we want to control. Well, he hit him to get him to stop crying.
Mm.
Maybe someone had even hit this little guy when he had cried. We don't know. But the other child who gave her blanket, she had been taken care of when she was in pain. So she was able to see his pain and be there with it in a present way that said, I'll take care of you. I'll share what I have with you, right? So I think if we can help heal if we can heal our own pain, we can be there for someone.
Mm.
And if we can help others heal, they're more likely to be able to be there for each other.
Mm. And how should we do that? I mean, do you think that we as individuals just need to engage more in practices like journaling our emotions and trying to have a meditation practice and those?
Great question. Great question. I think the truth is that life sends us constant homework. If you think about your inbox, think about yesterday, think about the day before, think about all week.
Mm.
Anytime you were short-tempered, anytime you got annoyed, anytime you lost your temper and yelled, anytime you felt uncharitable or judgmental of anyone else, but also of yourself, right? That's all homework.
Mm.
And many people listening to this might say, no, that's not homework for me to work on. My husband deserved me to be short-tempered with him. He was irresponsible about XYZ. He didn't come through when he promised me he would be home on time. Of course I was mad at him. Yes, the world will always give you things that you can respond to with a chip on your shoulder, feeling shortchanged, feeling annoyed at. But some of us will look at those things and will have a much more emotionally generous response at times. All of us might be emotionally generous at times, but there will be times when we are short. Now, maybe we just didn't get enough sleep last night. That's, if we don't have a full cup, we can't greet the world with emotional generosity. But I think the truth is that if there's something that pushes your buttons over and over again, that's something to work on.
Mm.
And you mentioned journaling. Journaling has been shown to be a great way to start working on something because it allows you to reflect. It engages the part of you that therapists would call the observing ego. But really, it's maybe the wiser part of you that's not emotionally invested and can just notice it. And I add, you mentioned working on self-compassion. I would add that journaling where you're ranting and raving against yourself, I can't believe I lost my temper, is not going to help. It's got to be journaling where your premise going in is that you're worthy of your own love. And it's okay. You don't have to be perfect to merit that love. You're allowed to make mistakes and you want to grow. And you want to grow in love for yourself. So this is not an exercise in making yourself wrong. It's an exercise in increasing your love for yourself and noticing where you have choice points, where you might do something differently next time. And where do you get triggered? Where do you feel a sense of threat? If your 3-year-old is defiant, is that really a threat? So yes, journaling is a great way. You mentioned meditation. I was in therapy a lot as a young person, a young adult, before I ever had children. But I would say that the biggest changes in me have all come through meditation. I'm a meditator and have been for many years. And I would say that's really where the tenderness and the sense of trust in the universe that allows that tenderness and the self-compassion have all come from.
That's amazing. And I think what you're talking about is it's like a shift in the way that we perceive life. So I think that sort of I was given a story growing up that, the whole point of life was to avoid the obstacles and to try and just have everything turn out really well. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that actually, no, the point is that you have these things that come up and they're all trying to show you something. And if they keep coming up, they're really trying to tell you or show you something. And
Yes.
it's about paying attention to these like signals and signs and difficulties and rough spots, and actually then what can we make of this, and how can we grow. But I do feel again like that's an alternative narrative that's often seen as a hippie, hippy dippy way of approaching the world. But I actually believe that if we can shift into seeing things more in that way, then we can really like do the work on ourselves that you're talking about.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I love that. And that narrative that we were all brought up with, I think, um, it basically was a narrative that said, discomfort is bad. But
Mm,
actually, when we're uncomfortable, often that's part of growing, right? So we don't want to be not growing. We don't want to be static. That then you might as well be dead, right? The point is actually to keep growing and
mm,
growing in love, as I mentioned, growing in understanding and compassion. I believe one of our purposes here is to bring more love into the world.
mm,
And we can only do that if we keep growing
mm,
um, and really, love does come out of, well, when you take an example, like when I was with my daughter, there was no love in the room at that moment. And I chose to bring some in. And
yeah.
we have those choices every day. And they're tiny, tiny little inflection points. But the more we do it,
Mm,
we are creating more love, or at least letting more love into the world through something. And and as we do that, I think we're also changing our own wiring.
mm,
Because when we experience more love, we know it makes us happier. There's this research on loving kindness meditation. So loving kindness meditation is a
yeah.
form of meditation where you send love into the world, right?
Mm,
And there's a whole little thing which we don't have to go into the details of, but you're sending love. And I do a version of that when I walk down the street in New York City, or when I sit on a subway car, where I just send love to people.
mm,
And what I notice is I can be in a bad mood. If I
mm,
walk out of my house in a bad mood, I immediately start sending love to people. Within 3 minutes, I'm in a great mood. These people may or may not know I'm sending love to them, right? It doesn't matter. They may see me smile with them, they may not. Doesn't matter, right? I'm in a great mood. Why am I in a great mood? Because I'm feeling love. When we're feeling love, we may be putting more love out into the universe. Who knows? We don't know about that. But I'm certainly feeling more love inside myself. And we know that changes your body chemistry and your brain chemistry and your neural wiring.
mm,
So we are creating more happiness for ourselves simply by choosing love
mm.
at those moments.
I think I'd love to be sitting in a subway car with you. I think you radiate that. I just wanted to talk, sort of we're sort of moving towards the end now, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of mental health. And my older daughter has struggled with anxiety for a few years now, and also in the interviews I've done on here so far, two people that I've interviewed have talked about their anxiety and the medication that they're taking now for anxiety, and is part of why I want to have these conversations, because it feels like it's getting to be almost like an epidemic of anxiety in our world. And I just I think I wish I could see a way through it. And I know, because I know intimately through conversations I have with my daughter, that sometimes I'm very optimistic, and she gets angry with me as though she feels I'm dismissing her feelings, or you think that just because I can think positively and these feelings will go away, but this is like real, this is anxiety, this is something else. And yeah, I was talking to her last night about her feelings, her difficult feelings, and I was sort of trying to say what we've just been talking about, how you may well have these feelings throughout your life, but actually that's okay. And that feels like quite a difficult thing to say, because I think what we want is, for, like with all these difficult feelings, for them to go away. And I don't want to dismiss anyone who takes medication for anxiety, and maybe she will also go down that path. But what I was trying to say was, it's like all these difficult things in life, I'm not dismissing any of them, and I have firsthand had very difficult experiences of grief, and I know how difficult difficult feelings are and can be. But also, I just really want to say it's part of all of it. Like, it's part of the experience of life. And so with her anxiety, she said, I just want to be like a normal person, and I don't want to have this anymore, and I want to be like able to just be confident and relaxed in situations. And yeah, I just kept on saying, you can work on this, and you might feel like this more sometimes than others, and but sometimes it's difficult to know what to say.
Yes, yes. I think you're right. There's an epidemic of anxiety in children and in adults in our right now. And I think that some amount of anxiety is a natural state for humans, because the human mind is always like worried about what's going to happen next, right? There's no certainty, and life is uncertain, right? We know that more now than we've ever understood it, right? And after the events of the last year. Gabor Mate says, as long as you don't allow the fear to be there, you're always going to be working to get rid of it. And anxiety is just fear, right? So what happens with anxiety is we start to notice, right? And that's why I spoke about threat earlier. That's those signals coming in that are threat. So it might be that we're perceiving the situation. Oh, everybody at this party is staring at me. I just walked in and I have social anxiety and everybody's staring at me. And so my brain has just, it's not really true they're staring at me, but I've perceived it that way. So the brain feels threat and it sends the body a message. We got a threat here, fight, flight, or freeze. Well, the body starts to rev up. The body gets adrenaline and cortisol, and you start to sweat and your heart starts to pound. You're hyperventilating. This is all in preparation for running from that tiger or fighting off the robber. But you're in a social situation where it's not helpful. But now, what has just happened? Now that the body feels all this, there's a feedback loop both directions. So the body is sending a message to the brain saying, we got a problem here. We're sweating. We're hyperventilating. There must be some danger here. And then the brain goes, okay, we were right. There's danger. And it starts to escalate and spiral out of control. And before you know it, you've got a full-blown panic attack going, right?
Yeah.
So this is what anxiety does. Anxiety feeds on itself with those feedback loops. But here's the really great news. It doesn't have to. Because those same feedback loops can be interrupted and used to reassure your nervous system. But you have to start by accepting the fear. If you try to, the minute you walk into that party and you think everyone's looking at you, if you say, nope, no one's looking at me, it's all fine, some parties are going, no, you're ignoring the danger. There's real danger here, right? So you can't just ignore it. You can't just squash. You can't fight anxiety. You can't numb it. You can't pretend it's not there. You can't push it away. What you have to do is normalize it. Of course, anxiety is showing up. It's trying to look after me. It knows I get a little worried in social situations. It's trying to make sure I'm okay. That's what anxiety is doing. My worry, of course, it's going to show up here. It's trying to keep me safe. It's okay to feel a little awkward when I first walk in. It's fine. I can take some deep breaths and send my brain, my body, I'm going to take some deep breaths because I can control my breathing to some degree. I'm going to send, because, if there were really a tiger or a robber, you would not be stopping to take deep breaths, right? So you take these deep breaths, and these people are doing whatever they're doing at the party, but you've turned away and you're pretending you're taking off your jacket and you're taking deep breaths. And meanwhile, what's happening inside you with the feedback loop? Your body is taking deep, long breaths. You're lingering on the out breath, which calms you down, actually. You can even take a breath, hold your nose and breathe out without really letting out the air, and let it go. And that actually has the effect. It's called the Valsalva maneuver, I think. And it actually has the effect of settling your nervous system. There are all kinds of little tricks you can use. You can go like this, tapping. There are many little things you can do, breathing. But the more you practice any of these when you're calm, the better they work in that moment of stress. So all of this your body is sending now in the feedback loop the message to the brain, I guess it's really okay. We don't have a problem here. And the guys downstream in charge of the cortisol and the adrenaline, they're going, hey, no tiger, no robber, shut off the adrenaline, guys, shut off the cortisol. It's cool. She's fine. It's just a party, you know. And right. So you have interrupted that feedback loop, but you did have to acknowledge you're not avoiding, because, you know, when you feel anxious, no amount of telling yourself it's okay is going to work when you're feeling, because when you feel that way, your body says, oh my God, there's a robber, there's a tiger, we've got to run, right? So from the point of view of fear, you could not have a high enough wall. And that's why when you give fear an inch, it takes a mile, right? If you don't go to parties anymore, then after a while, you can't even go to the grocery store, right? Like you give fear an inch, it starts to, you know, because from the point of view of fear, it's happiness is not on the agenda. It's just build that wall higher to keep you safe, right? But from the point of view of presence, of compassion for yourself, of love, choosing love instead. In some ways, every choice is about fear or love. I'm going with the love. Okay, love for me, right? It's just love. And from the point of view of love, there's no wall that's necessary. You're not actually in danger. You can cultivate trust. So I do think you empathize with your daughter. You say, I hear how worried you are about this. I hear how anxious you feel. And, you know, we can try to prepare for that party. You can think in advance of what you can do to help yourself feel better. But it's okay to feel a little nervous, a little anxious, you know? It's okay to not know exactly how it'll unfold, because you know what? Your worries will always come up with something to scare you. But you actually can handle it, sweetheart, no matter what. I know you don't feel like you can because you're worried, but you handled this thing and you handled that thing and you handled that thing.
Yeah, and
So,
it's amazing
right?
how often people with anxiety are actually also extremely high achievers.
Yes.
She is, and as these some people I've interviewed for the podcast already, extremely high achievers, very, you know, showing up in the world, you know, on the BBC in, you know, very high profile jobs, yet, you know, really struggling with anxiety as well. So it's really interesting. So what you're saying is it's sort of almost like normalizing it. So it's sort of telling yourself, you know, this feeling, you know, it's almost expected that this is going to come up. It's a
Yeah.
party. It's okay.
Yeah.
And then it's the thoughts around that feeling. So it's like all those difficult thoughts that you're telling yourself, oh, you know, I'm feeling bad, but I shouldn't be, or all those people are looking at me. It's kind of being aware of what's going on in your
Yes.
mind.
Noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I call it the three N's, of fear, of handling fear. You notice it. You notice the whole, you know, spiraling out of control thing, the thoughts spiraling out of control, notice it, normalize it. It's fine. It's gonna, of course it's here. Hi, fear. Thought you'd come with me. Of course you're here trying to keep me safe. Thank you, fear. And then the third N, not stopping me, not stopping me. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Feel the fear. It's fine to feel the fear and do it anyway. And every time you do that, you build confidence, right? We're not trying to raise humans who don't feel fear or anxiety. We're trying to raise humans who develop confidence in themselves that whatever happens, whatever life throws at them, they are going to handle it, because the truth is they will handle it. They do handle it.
I know, that's the thing. I think it's just like a real contradiction. It's like I can do so much, but I'm so scared. But I can do so much, but I'm so scared. Yeah.
Well, I think you have to go through the discomfort.
Mm.
If your daughter didn't have the experience of encountering the discomfort at the party, let's say, and handling it, then she wouldn't know she could do that, would she? What we're doing is retraining our brain. No, it wasn't. The amygdala was blaring these alarms. Problem, problem, threat, threat. But actually, it turned out it wasn't a problem. It wasn't a threat. It was scary, but it was fine. She even talked to a couple people, let's say. And when you leave that party, you're like, okay, it wasn't an emergency and I handled it. Next time I'll still feel scared, but I have a little more confidence, and the brain and nervous system doesn't go to threat quite so quickly next time.
Absolutely. And it's like talking about it in that way afterwards, like, yeah, but look what you did. And, you know, you managed to speak to those people. And aren't you glad that you went, you know, having those conversations and
Yes.
reinforcing those kind of new neural pathways, I guess.
I think that's right. But it isn't lecturing them. It's letting them experience it and learn from reflecting on their experience, right?
Yeah, and encouraging and nurturing and keep having those experiences, and I'll be here. Yeah, I'll be here for you.
Yeah. I think you started this with empathy. Empathizing is hard, and listening is hard. But if someone's expressing to you how scared they feel about this social event, you absolutely empathize with that's normal to feel scared. Of course you feel scared. That's normal to feel scary. It doesn't feel good. I know you wish you could just be like some of those people who love to be the life of the party, who storm in and take the stage in the room. And, you wish you could be like that. I understand, sweetie, and that's not who you are, how you feel, but you can actually intervene with how you feel, and you can grow in being able to tolerate the discomfort so you feel less of it.
Absolutely. And you're you, and you wouldn't want to be different.
Yes, that other person.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Oh, I can't tell you, Dr. Laura, how much I have enjoyed speaking to you. I've just really felt we've really connected, and it's just been such an amazing and really heart-opening and such really enlightening discussion. And I really wanted to finish with a question that I ask all the guests at the end. So the tenderness revolution is this quality of tenderness for ourselves and others. And I came up with a concept by thinking about these 3 C's that are behind this quality of tenderness. So for me, these 3 C's enable us to sort of fully see the truth about the way things are. So they're courage, compassion, and curiosity. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to choose one of these sort of qualities that really shows up the most in your life, which one would you choose?
Well, I'd say compassion is my MO. It's what I do all day, every day with parents, because parents so need to be loved and accepted and appreciated and admired and encouraged.
Yeah.
So compassion is what I do. And I'm always still trying to grow in compassion and to notice if I have a judgmental thought about myself or anyone else, I try to notice it and have an antidote of compassion there. But I love the idea of courage, and I love the idea of curiosity. And I think they're all 3 so important. And that if we were more curious, we would be, with our children, let's say, we would be less controlling and more compassionate, right? If we were just, I wonder why she's acting like that right now, rather than stop acting like that, right? If we were more curious. And also courageous. You mentioned feeling like other people were judging your parenting. I think we have an inner compass. We know what our child needs. We can't always do it because we're human, but let's have our inability to do it be that we're still growing, not that somebody looked at us in the supermarket wrong, because our responsibility is to our child, not that person in the supermarket looking at us judgmentally. So I think having the courage to act based on our own inner compass is also such an important part of this. I love all 3 of those words.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you. I love your response, and I've loved all your answers. It's been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you again for being on the Tenderness Revolution. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I have loved having a chance to talk about these ideas with you, which are so important for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll end it there, but thank you so much again. I feel so grateful to have actually been able to speak to you face to face and glean all your wonderful knowledge. It's really very much of a privilege. And Aisha's here. Do you want to come and say hi? Aisha's been in the background all this time.
I'm always
Hi, Aisha. Glad to meet you. Thanks for doing the production on this.
Yes, no, it was great. I was listening in on all of it, and you had so many amazing things to say. I have 2 young nieces, and I just kept thinking about them the whole time. I'm like, I wish I could just tell everything she just said to my sister-in-law and my brother.
Yeah, and I really think so many people are going to really find what you've said so helpful and so
Powerful.
moving and powerful. Yeah. I think we kind of went underneath some of the things that are often talked about in relation to parenting, and that's what I'm sort of trying to do, is get underneath things, you know, and what are the emotions driving a lot of these difficult situations and behaviors. And I really appreciate you doing that with me. It was really good.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for taking the time out. I know that you're busy.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Please let us know when this is going to air.
Yeah, we will.
We're expecting to launch in September, so we'll keep you posted with all the links. I'm following you on Instagram, so I'll make sure I tag you on everything as we start launching episode by episode.
Yeah.
Great. My assistant Beth is the one who handles all of that, so she's the right person to talk to. And in fact, she will ask me this. If you don't mind sharing the recording, there will be little snippets that she will just pull out to use for promotion.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
no
we can do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sounds perfect.
Oh, have a fantastic day. I really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure to meet you both, and I'm sure we'll meet again.
I hope so. I really love talking to you.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Tenderness Revolution. I hope you come back for more, because my aim with this podcast is to help us become more aware of these moments of kindness and compassion and how they shape our lives, and enable us to feel more connected to the world around us.